I turned 60 the day I stood outside a beachside restaurant and was told by my own sister that I was not welcome at my own birthday dinner. Julie stood at the entrance, arms folded, wearing the same icy expression she had perfected over decades. I had just stepped out of the cab holding a homemade lemon cake in one hand and a small paper bag filled with carefully chosen gifts for my children in the other. She did not even look surprised to see me, just annoyed. Lynn, this dinner is meant to be a quiet family gathering. We talked about it, and we all agreed it would be best if you did not come. Her voice was calm, rehearsed, the kind of voice people use when pretending they are not doing something cruel. My fingers tightened around the cake box. I said I was invited. Rachel texted me last week. Julie glanced behind her into the warmly lit restaurant where I could hear laughter and clinking glasses. She stepped forward, slightly lowering her voice. That was before we realized it might make people uncomfortable. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. It was my birthday. I had not seen my children together in almost 2 years, and now the door was being closed in my face by the person who had once shared a bedroom with me as a child. My sister. I looked past her just long enough to catch a glimpse of my daughter through the window. She was laughing at something completely unaware. I nodded slowly. "All right," I said quietly. "I understand." I turned around and walked back toward the street, holding the lemon cake tightly with both hands. My feet moved automatically, but my heart stayed behind. I had imagined this night so many times. A chance to feel like a mother again, to belong. Instead, I found myself alone on a sidewalk, rejected from the one place I never imagined needing an invitation to enter, my own birthday. And somehow, even after all these years, it still hurt. My name is Lynn Walker. I turned 60 this summer, and for the past 8 years, I have lived alone in a modest 2-bedroom house on the outskirts of a quiet coastal town in Oregon. It is the kind of place where the mail carrier knows your dog's name and the waves lull you to sleep if you leave the window open. I was a teacher for 31 years, elementary school. I taught second grade for most of that time. And if you have ever spent a year with 7-year-olds, you know it takes equal parts patience, humor, and a strange kind of faith in the future. I loved my job. I loved the routines, the glitter-covered chaos, the small triumphs. I retired earlier than I wanted to after a mild heart scare 3 winters ago. My doctor called it a warning shot. I listened. People assume retirement means freedom, but for me, it meant silence. The kind that settles too easily in the corners of a quiet house, when no one calls and no one comes by. The kind that makes you second guess whether you were ever really needed as much as you believed. I have 2 children. Ethan is 32, a lawyer in Portland. Steady private, always the responsible one. Rachel is 29, an artist and designer full of ideas in motion, but harder to reach emotionally. They are good people, kind, smart. I raised them to be thoughtful and self-reliant, and I used to think that would be enough to keep us close. But life doesn't follow lesson plans. 8 years ago, my marriage ended. Neil, my husband of 25 years, and I agreed it was no longer working. That was the polite version. The real version involved silence, stretched too long disappointments never named, and eventually someone else, not on my side. The divorce was quiet on paper but messy in every other way. Neil had the charm, the narrative, and the backing of someone who had long wanted a bigger role in our family story, my younger sister, Julie. Julie is 5 years younger than me, always the golden one, effortlessly social, well-groomed, and persuasive in that way that makes you doubt your own memory. When we were girls, she followed me around like a shadow. As adults, she stepped into my children's lives with the same intensity, especially once Neil and I separated. She offered to help. Pickups, advice, sleepovers at her house. At first, I was grateful. But slowly, I noticed the shift. Questions from Ethan that sounded like echoes of Neil's complaints. Rachel growing distant, politely declining my invitations with excuses that felt rehearsed. And Julie always smiling, always just trying to help. I tried not to believe it. I told myself I was imagining things. That time and healing would bring us back together. I kept showing up. I sent birthday cards with handwritten notes, care packages, books I thought they would like. I even stayed cordial with Neil, thinking it would make things easier for the kids. But something had shifted. I was no longer at the center of their orbit. I had become an optional stop, a second thought. Still, I never gave up. I believed in the long game, that one day Rachel would want to talk, that Ethan would remember what it felt like to sit at the kitchen table doing homework while I made spaghetti and quizzed him on history dates. And so I stayed close. Not in distance, they both lived 2 hours away, but in spirit. I knew the names of their coworkers, their favorite takeout orders, the movies they liked, all from pieces I collected over time, through brief calls, social media posts, scraps of conversation when they had time. It wasn't much, but it kept me going. And then out of nowhere came the message, a text from Rachel. Simple. "Hey Mom, Aunt Julie is putting together a birthday dinner for you. She thought it would be nice. We'll all be there." My fingers trembled reading it. I hadn't celebrated my birthday with both of my children in years. The idea that they wanted me there, that they had planned something, made me feel seen again, wanted. I didn't ask too many questions. I didn't want to jinx it. I said thank you, I'd love to come. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself hope. There was no single moment when my family fell apart. It didn't come crashing down like a dropped plate. It was quieter than that, slower, like wallpaper peeling off the walls one corner at a time until one day you realize the room no longer feels like home. Neil and I had been drifting for years before we said the words out loud. At first, it was the little things. Missed dinners, tense silences, conversations that felt more like transactions. Then came the weekends away for work that stretched longer, the whispered phone calls he thought I didn't hear, and finally the text message I wasn't meant to see. It didn't take a genius to fill in the blanks. Still, when we sat across from each other at the mediation table, it was civil, efficient. Two people tired of the weight of pretending. We agreed on almost everything. Joint custody had long ceased to be a concern. Ethan and Rachel were adults. Assets were split cleanly. The house went to Neil. I took the cabin by the coast. Neither of us fought, but divorce, even quiet ones, leave loud echoes. For the first few months, I gave the kids space. I thought they needed time to process, to figure out how to navigate between us without feeling torn. I never wanted them to choose sides. I believed that if I simply stayed steady, available, and open, they'd come around. I underestimated Julie. Julie had always been close with Neil, closer than I realized in hindsight. During the marriage, I saw it as convenience. They both loved wine tastings, weekend hikes, and making witty jabs about my overthinking. I told myself it was harmless, a friendship. But after the divorce, Julie's involvement deepened. She started hosting dinners at her place every other weekend, inviting Neil, inviting the kids, and not inviting me. She told Rachel it was to keep the peace, that seeing both parents at the same event might be too hard. She told Ethan that I needed time to heal and probably shouldn't be overwhelmed with family functions right away. I didn't know any of this until much later. What I did notice was the shift. Ethan stopped calling weekly. Rachel's texts became one-word replies. I'd send a message about a recipe or ask how work was going and get a polite thumbs-up emoji in return. I asked if something was wrong. They both said no, just busy. Life was full. I understood, I said. I always tried to be understanding. But Julie had a way of rewriting stories. She was subtle, smart. She didn't lie outright. She reshaped, reframed. She'd tell the kids that I seemed unstable lately, that I might be having a hard time, that she was worried about me. It made her sound concerned, compassionate even, but underneath she was planting seeds. By the time I noticed the garden growing, it was too late. I once showed up to Rachel's art exhibit in the city. I had seen a post online and decided to surprise her. I brought flowers, drove 2 hours in the rain. When I arrived, she looked stunned, not happy, startled. "Wow, I didn't know you were coming," she said, smiling tightly. I tried to brush it off. "I thought it might be nice. I didn't want to miss it." Julie was already there, standing beside Neil, chatting easily with Rachel's friends. That night, I drove home alone, wondering why it felt like I was crashing a party that used to be mine. Other moments confirmed the change. When Ethan graduated law school, there was a celebration dinner. I wasn't invited. Julie later told me it was last minute and only a few people. But the photos online showed otherwise: balloons, speeches, a full table of familiar faces. Everyone but me. Birthdays became awkward. I would mail gifts sometimes with no acknowledgement. Other times I'd get a thank you text from Rachel that felt more like an obligation than joy. The worst moment came when I learned from a neighbor, someone I ran into at the grocery store, that Neil had remarried. Rachel had been a bridesmaid. Ethan gave a toast. Julie had organized the whole event. I hadn't even known he was engaged. That night I sat on my back porch wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun sink into the sea. I cried quietly. Not because Neil had moved on. That part I had made peace with, but because my children had shared a momentous family event, and I hadn't even been told. I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of my own life. I thought about reaching out, writing a letter, pouring it all out, but something held me back. Maybe pride, maybe fear, maybe both. Instead, I kept choosing quiet love. I kept baking the cookies they liked as kids and mailing them every Christmas. I kept sending handwritten cards on birthdays. I remembered their anniversaries and milestones. I kept lighting a candle on the windowsill each Sunday evening, the same one I used to light when they were in college, just to remind myself they were still out there, still connected to me in some way. Julie, in the meantime, became the central figure in their lives. She hosted Planned Mediated. She told them I was doing okay, but never gave specifics. She kept me on the outside always. There was a time when I thought she was trying to help. Maybe she thought she was. But over time it became clear. Julie liked being the one they came to. She liked being seen as the glue, the peacemaker. And she couldn't be that if I was allowed to step back in. Still, I waited for the moment when one of them would reach out not out of obligation, but out of love. That moment finally came unexpectedly with Rachel's text. A dinner, my birthday. Everyone would be there. It felt like a crack in the wall, a sign that maybe, just maybe, I had not been forgotten. I read Rachel's message 3 times before I let myself believe it was real. Hey Mom, Aunt Julie's putting together a dinner for your birthday next Saturday. It's at Seabrook Grill. Starts at 6. We'll all be there. No frills, no emojis. But it was more than I had gotten in a long time. For a few moments, I just sat there, staring at the screen in my hand, unsure how to respond. I wanted to ask a dozen questions. Who suggested it? Why now? Did they really want me there? Or was this some form of polite obligation? But I didn't ask any of them. Instead, I typed, "Thank you. I'd love to come and hit send before I could talk myself out of it." After that, everything felt different. I moved through the week with a strange lightness, a cautious joy. It was the kind of feeling you do not want to touch too much in case it disappears. Like fog on the surface of still water. I decided to bake a lemon cake. Not just any cake, my mother's recipe passed down through a dozen stained index cards and long phone calls. It was the cake I used to make when Rachel was a child, and had dance recitals, the one Ethan requested for his 14th birthday. It felt like the right thing to bring. Familiar, thoughtful, a symbol of connection. The kitchen filled with the scent of lemons and sugar and memory. I played an old jazz record while I baked something I hadn't done in years. I even sang a little, the kind of humming that comes from somewhere deeper than your lungs. I also decided to bring gifts, not flashy ones, just small, meaningful things. For Ethan, a leather-bound notebook for his court arguments embossed with his initials. For Rachel, a pair of vintage watercolor brushes I found at a tiny shop in town, the kind she used to love when she was in art school. And for Julie, yes, even Julie, a jar of my homemade marmalade with a handwritten label. I had made it the week before with oranges from the neighbor's tree. Sweet, bitter, just like everything between us. I wrapped them carefully. Not in glittery birthday paper, but in soft, neutral tones tied with twine. I added little cards to each, nothing dramatic. Just a few words to say, I still know who you are. I still care. Then came the question of what to wear. It had been a long time since I thought about clothes for anything other than comfort. But this night felt different. Not a chance to impress exactly. Just to show up as my best self. To remind them I was still here. Still whole. I chose a navy blue dress that had been sitting in the back of my closet, one I had bought years ago for a school retirement banquet, and never worn again. It fit a little looser than it used to, but the fabric still moved gracefully. I paired it with a silver pendant that Rachel had made in high school ceramics class. I had kept it all these years. The glaze was cracked in places, but it still caught the light. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a woman with soft lines on her face, streaks of gray in her hair, and eyes that held too many unsent letters. But I also saw someone strong enough to keep loving through the silence, and that I told myself was something worth showing up with. The morning of the dinner, I woke early. The sky was clear. The kind of blue that only coastal towns know, where the air feels a little saltier, a little more forgiving. I spent the day slowly. I watered my garden, I ironed the dress, I triple-checked the packaging on the cake. At 5:00 p.m., I called a cab. The driver was chatty, talking about his own mother, about traffic, about the weather. I answered politely, but my mind was elsewhere, playing out every possible version of the night ahead. Would they be happy to see me? Would it feel normal? Would we talk like we used to? More than anything, I wanted it to feel real, not forced, not something orchestrated by Julie. I wanted one true thing. When we pulled up outside Seabrook Grill, the sun was just beginning to sink. Warm, golden light spilled across the sidewalk. I paid the fare, stepped out of the car, and adjusted the gift bag over one arm, the cake carrier in the other. I took a deep breath, and then I walked toward the door. The entrance to Seabrook Grill was framed by hanging ferns and string lights. From outside, it looked warm, inviting the kind of place people gather to mark something special. Through the large window near the front, I caught a glimpse of soft candlelight white tablecloths and the faint silhouettes of people shifting in their chairs. Laughter rose muffled but unmistakable. I walked up the short brick path, careful not to let the gift bag swing too much, balancing the cake in both hands. My heart was thudding harder than I liked, not from the walk, from hope and fear. I had barely reached the door when it opened. Julie stood there as if waiting. She was dressed sharply in her usual understated way, pale blue wrap dress hair, perfectly styled. Her smile was tight, more a formality than a greeting. I saw surprise flicker in her eyes, quickly replaced by something harder. "Lynn," she said flatly, not moving from the doorway. "Hi," I said. I nodded toward the inside. "I'm here for the dinner," Rachel said. Julie held up one hand. "I know what she said," she interrupted. "And we talked. After she sent that message." I blinked. We decided, she said slowly, her voice lowering just enough to make the moment feel private and sharp, "that it's probably best if you don't come in." I stood frozen, unsure if I had misheard her. She went on, her tone clinical. This was meant to be a relaxing evening. Family, no tension. And you showing up, it might complicate things. "I am family," I said quietly. "It's my birthday." "I know," Julie replied. "But that doesn't mean this is the right setting. It's taken a long time to make things feel normal again." "You stepping back in." "Look, I'm asking you not to make a scene." My hands trembled slightly. I gripped the cake carrier tighter. "You could have called," I said. She shrugged. "We weren't sure if you'd come, or how you'd react." Behind her, I could see into the dining room. Rachel was laughing at something Ethan had said. Neil raised his glass. Everyone looked comfortable. At home, no one was looking toward the door. No one had noticed me. I swallowed hard. My mouth felt dry. "So you all agreed," I said, "to not tell me until I was standing here?" Julie gave a small nod. It was a group decision. I stood there another moment. The gifts felt heavy now. So did the cake. So did everything. "Okay," I said finally. Julie looked relieved. "Thank you for understanding." I nodded once, turned away, and walked slowly back toward the sidewalk. No one followed. No one called my name. The restaurant door clicked shut behind me, muffling the sound of laughter I was never meant to be part of. I walked 2 blocks before realizing I didn't even know where I was going. But I knew I couldn't go back home. Not yet. I found a bench near the boardwalk and sat down slowly, the gift bag at my feet, the lemon cake resting in my lap like something fragile I no longer knew what to do with. The sky had shifted while I walked. The golden hue of early evening had softened into the blue-gray quiet just before dusk. A few families strolled by, children with dripping ice cream cones, couples holding hands. Their laughter drifted past me, light and unbothered. I sat very still. I didn't cry right away. I don't cry easily anymore. Not because I'm strong, just practiced. Practiced at holding things in, at sitting through discomfort, at swallowing grief in small, manageable doses. But eventually, the stillness gave way. It started with a tightness in my throat, then a tremble in my shoulders. And then I was crying quietly but uncontrollably on a bench, not far from where I used to take my children for fish and chips when they were small. The same stretch of boardwalk where we once rented bikes, where Rachel had fallen and scraped her knee, and Ethan had bandaged it with a napkin and tape from a souvenir shop. Those days felt impossibly far away. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to breathe, to not scare the passerby, to not look like a woman unraveling on a summer evening. This wasn't supposed to happen. I had tried. I had tried so hard. For years, I had told myself that if I just stayed kind, patient, consistent, they'd come back. That eventually the fog Julie had pulled around them would lift and they'd remember who I really was. But tonight shattered that story. I wasn't just forgotten. I was actively shut out. They'd talked about it, agreed on it, looked at my name on a list and said, "She doesn't belong." I looked down at the cake in my lap. It had taken me hours. I had grated the zest by hand, whipped the frosting until it was smooth and light. I had piped tiny lemon curls around the edges. Now it sat untouched, meant for people who didn't want me. The bag at my feet held gifts wrapped with care, each one chosen deliberately, each card written by hand, and none of it mattered. I pulled my phone from my purse. For a moment I hovered over Ethan's contact, then Rachel's, then Julie's. I didn't press call. What would I say? That I was hurt, that I felt humiliated, that being turned away from my own birthday dinner made me question every memory we'd ever shared. No, they had made their choice. Instead, I opened my photo gallery. Years of images saved and reshuffled each time I got a new phone. I scrolled past holidays, birthdays, blurry shots of Ethan in his graduation cap, Rachel posing in her prom dress, arms around friends whose names I barely remembered. There were photos from the cabin, our old home, the beach, the school fundraisers, Halloween costumes, movie nights, and then less. After the divorce, the photos thinned out. Fewer smiles, more of my garden, my books, my walks, my solitude. But even in the gaps, I kept their pictures. I told myself it was a mother's job to hold space, to remain a constant even when her children drifted. But I hadn't realized how far they had gone. I looked up again. The ocean had darkened. The street lamps buzzed faintly overhead. Somewhere nearby, a gull cried out sharp and lonely. How had it come to this? How had I gone from bedtime stories and school pickups to standing alone outside a restaurant uninvited to a life I helped build? The hardest part wasn't that they excluded me. It was that they didn't see it as cruelty. They saw it as maintenance, as protection, as tidiness. And I was the mess. My breath caught again. I thought of all the times I bit my tongue. When Julie said I was too emotional or too intense in front of the kids. When Ethan repeated something Neil had once used to dismiss me. When Rachel began responding with clipped politeness instead of warmth. I'd told myself they were growing up, becoming independent. That pulling away was part of that process. But now I saw it differently. Julie hadn't just filled a gap. She had created it. She'd reshaped the narrative while I stood outside the frame. And I had let her. Out of politeness, out of fear of pushing too hard and driving the kids further away. I'd chosen silence, deference, patience. And where had it brought me? Here, alone, on my birthday, with a cake that no one would eat. I leaned back on the bench exhausted. The wind had picked up, tugging gently at my hair. My pendant, the one Rachel made in high school, rested against my collarbone. I reached up and touched it. The glaze was still smooth, still cool. That part of her, of us, still existed. I didn't know what to do next, whether to get a hotel room, drive home, call someone. I hadn't told anyone about the dinner. I hadn't wanted to risk the embarrassment of it falling through, of it being just another polite performance with no heart behind it. But now the silence felt heavier than ever. I opened my phone again and stared at the contacts. This time I scrolled all the way down. Past family, past school contacts, past doctors and delivery services. to Mark Richards. He had been the principal at my school for 15 years. We had worked together closely, shared morning coffees, ventured out for staff dinners. He had retired the year before I did, and we had kept in touch, though, sporadically. He had texted me 2 weeks ago asking if I wanted to grab lunch sometime. I hadn't replied yet. Now I tapped call. It rang twice. Then his voice answered warm and steady. "Lynn, wow, I was just thinking about you." That was all it took. My voice cracked. "Mark, I'm sorry to bother you, but I didn't know who else to call. I didn't explain everything. Not right away, but I didn't need to." His tone shifted. "Where are you? Are you safe?" "Yes," I whispered. "Just not okay. I'll come get you." "You don't have to. I'm already grabbing my keys. Just text me your location." I hesitated, then sent it. And for the first time that night, I felt a flicker of relief. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew I wouldn't be facing it alone. Mark pulled up 15 minutes later in the same silver Subaru I remembered from school parking lots. He got out quickly, jacket still half-buttoned, his expression tight with concern, but not panic. That had always been his gift, staying steady, especially when everyone else was unraveling. I stood as he approached. The cake still rested on my lap. The gift bag was at my feet. I must have looked like someone waiting for a bus that would never come. "Hey," he said softly. "You okay?" I nodded, but my eyes gave me away. He saw it. He always saw it. He didn't push. Instead, he gently took the cake from my hands and opened the passenger door. "Come on," he said. "Let's get you somewhere warmer." The car smelled like pine and something faintly citrus. A little air freshener swayed from the mirror. Mark adjusted the heat and didn't say anything right away. I appreciated that. The silence felt intentional, not awkward. Once we were on the road, he glanced over. "You want to tell me what happened?" I hesitated. Then slowly, I began to talk. I told him about the message from Rachel, the dinner plans, the hope, the preparations, and finally the moment on the restaurant steps when Julie told me I wasn't welcome. I spoke quietly, my voice breaking only once. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "I'm so sorry, Lynn. It's cruel." I shook my head. I don't know if it was meant to be cruel. I think they honestly thought they were protecting something, themselves maybe, or some version of peace they've managed to build without me. "That's not peace," he said, his voice sharper now. "That's erasure." The word hung in the air. I don't know what to do. I admitted. "I feel foolish for going, for hoping." "You're not foolish," he said firmly. "You're a mother who wants to be part of her children's lives. That's not naive, it's brave." I looked out the window. The ocean shimmered darkly in the distance. Lights from the town flickered like a scattered constellation. "I just don't want to be the source of more tension," I said. Maybe Mark replied, "It's time to stop worrying about whether you're making them uncomfortable and start asking why they're so comfortable excluding you." I turned to look at him. He wasn't angry for me. He was angry with me. That subtle difference made me sit up straighter. "You think I should go back?" I said quietly. "I think you should decide what kind of story you're going to let them write about you," he replied. "Because right now Julie is holding the pen. And from everything you've told me, she's been writing you out of the picture for years." The car slowed at a red light. He looked over again. "I'll go with you," he added. "You don't have to do it alone." I stared at him, unsure what to say. "Just to the door," he added. "No drama, no speeches. But if you're ready, I think they need to see you. To remember who you are." The light turned green. We moved forward again. I watched the streets pass by, and with them my fear. It didn't vanish, but it changed shape. Maybe I thought it was time to stop waiting to be invited in and start reminding people I had never left. We pulled into the lot behind Seabrook Grill just as twilight gave way to full night. The glow from the restaurant windows spilled onto the pavement, golden and warm. It looked like a painting from far away. The kind of gathering you imagine yourself walking into, greeted with laughter and arms around shoulders. But not tonight. Mark parked, turned off the engine, and looked at me. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for." I nodded. "I know." I opened the door and stepped out. My knees felt unsteady at first, but I straightened myself, smoothed the fabric of my dress, and lifted my chin. I didn't bring the cake this time, or the gifts. I left them in the back seat. The front entrance was quieter now. No host standing outside, just the murmur of conversation within a little fainter now, like the evening had grown tired too. I walked to the door. This time Mark was a few steps behind me, not leading, not pushing, just present. I opened it. A hostess looked up and smiled. Table name. I paused. Walker, I said. Birthday party. She looked at her screen. Right this way. She led us through the main dining area. And then I saw them at the back, a long table, wine glasses, clinking dessert plates, cleared laughter still lingering in the air. Rachel was leaning in to show something to Ethan on her phone. Neil was talking to someone I didn't recognize. And Julie was at the head of the table, as if she had planned it that way. It took a moment for anyone to notice me. Rachel was the first. Her expression changed instantly. Surprise, then confusion, then something I couldn't quite name. Ethan followed her gaze. Julie turned last. Her smile faded before it reached her eyes. I stopped at the edge of the table. I won't stay, I said calmly. I just need to ask something. And then I'll go. No one spoke. I looked at Rachel. Did you know? She blinked. Know what? That I was uninvited. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. I thought... Aunt Julie said you weren't feeling well, that you asked to skip it. I looked at Ethan. He frowned. She said the same to me he said. That you didn't want to come. That you felt overwhelmed. I turned to Julie. Do you want to explain? Julie shifted in her seat, still composed, but her hands twitched slightly on the tablecloth. Lynn, I was trying to avoid a scene. You've been... fragile lately. I didn't think this was the right time. I let out a small breath. So you lied to them. I protected them, she said flatly. Rachel looked between us. Wait, you told us she didn't want to come. I thought it would be easier, Julie said. Easier for who Ethan asked. Julie's voice tightened. I have been holding this family together. For years. When things fell apart, I was the one who stepped in. You think it's been easy trying to manage everyone's feelings? No one asked you to manage anything, I said softer now. They just needed honesty. Julie scoffed. Oh, come on, Lynn. After the divorce, you disappeared. You ran away to that little house by the coast and let everyone else clean up the mess. I felt the sting of that, but I didn't flinch. I didn't run, I said. I gave space. I never said a word against Neil. I never told the kids what really happened. I didn't want to turn them into messengers or soldiers in someone else's battle. You let me look like the villain, she snapped. You made yourself the center, I replied. There was a long silence. Rachel finally spoke. Is that true? You told us she didn't want us around, that she missed calls on purpose, that she was too emotional to handle being in the same room with Dad. Julie looked at her face pale now. I was trying to protect you, she said again. Ethan stood. No, you were protecting a version of the story that put you in charge. Rachel looked at me. You baked the lemon cake? I nodded. It's in the car. I used to love that cake, she said almost in a whisper. I thought you stopped making it. I never stopped, I said. I just stopped being invited to bring it. Julie stood now too. I don't have to stand here and be accused. No, I said, my voice steady, you don't. But for 5 years I've stood outside this family while you decided who belonged. And tonight, I decided to stop waiting. I turned to Rachel and Ethan. I don't need you to pick sides. I just need the truth to be in the room. Mark stepped forward, then nodding at me gently, and I realized I had said everything I needed to. I started to leave, but Rachel caught my hand. Don't go yet. Her voice was small but clear. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Ethan nodded. Neither did I. And I'm sorry. Julie reached for her purse. This is ridiculous. All of you acting like I'm some manipulative... No one's acting, Rachel said. We're just waking up. Julie's mouth tightened. Fine. I'm done. She left without another word. I stood there still unsure if I was welcome. But then Rachel looked at the empty chair beside her and pulled it back. "Mom," she said softly, "stay." I sat down slowly, unsure if my legs would support me much longer. The room felt different now. The tension hadn't vanished, but it had shifted less like ice, more like fog beginning to lift. Rachel still had her hand on mine lightly. Her thumb traced the edge of my knuckle, the way she used to do when she was nervous as a child. No one said anything for a moment. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of realization, memory, regret. Ethan leaned forward. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" I looked at him. "Because I didn't want to make things worse. I thought if I just kept loving you quietly, you'd find your way back. I never imagined someone would be standing in the way." Rachel lowered her eyes. "She said you were angry all the time, that you didn't want to be around us unless we agreed with you." I shook my head slowly. "I was hurt, but I was never angry at either of you. I just missed you." Mark remained nearby but gave us space, settling quietly at a nearby table. I was grateful for his presence, not intrusive, not leading, just there. Ethan rested his elbows on the table, rubbing his forehead. "I feel stupid. I let her manage our relationship like it was part of a calendar." "You trusted someone you loved," I said gently. "That's not stupid. That's human." A server came by to refill water glasses. We all murmured thanks. She hesitated, sensing the tension, but said nothing. Rachel looked toward the door Julie had exited through. "She's been everything since the divorce. The one who shows up, plans things." I didn't realize she was shaping the narrative. She was good at it, I admitted. She knew just how to appear helpful, even as she made me invisible. Rachel swallowed hard. I believed her. I squeezed her hand. Believing someone isn't the same as betraying someone else. But now you know. That's what matters. Ethan nodded slowly. "So what happens now? That was the question, wasn't it?" "I don't expect us to go back," I said. "But maybe we can start from where we are. Without the edits. Without someone else directing the script." Rachel glanced down at the table, then up at me. "You said the cake's in the car." I smiled. "It is." She stood. "Then I think we need to go get it. This birthday's not over." Ethan rose too. "Let's leave. Let's go somewhere that's not full of all this." Mark looked over. "You're welcome at my place. It's not fancy, but the lights work and the plates don't match." Rachel turned to him. "You have wine." He smiled. 2 bottles, maybe 3. And just like that, something shifted again. Not a full repair, but the beginning of one. Mark's house sat just a few blocks inland, a modest craftsman with chipped shutters and a porch that smelled faintly of rosemary and old wood. It wasn't grand, it wasn't polished, but it felt safe. We arrived in 2 cars, Mark and me, and one Ethan and Rachel in the other. They had insisted on stopping to pick up the cake and gifts from the back seat before following us. That alone felt like a small miracle. Not because of the items themselves, but because of what they now represented. Recognition, effort, the first signs of return. Inside, Mark flicked on the lights and opened the windows to let in the soft night air. The living room had a lived-in comfort, mismatched throw pillows, an old bookshelf stuffed with paperbacks, and a record player in the corner humming something low and jazzy. Ethan carried the cake into the kitchen while Rachel carefully unwrapped the gifts and placed them on the coffee table. She studied the wrapping, the handwritten tags, the care in each fold of paper. "You still write like this," she said, almost to herself. "I still remember the things you love," I replied gently. She met my eyes and nodded once. That was all. Mark brought out glasses and a corkscrew. The wine was poured, the cake sliced. We sat on the floor, plates balanced in our laps, as if we were a group of college friends, rather than a fractured family finding its way back to something real. At first, we made small talk. Rachel described a client from her last design project who insisted on everything being eco-minimalist, but then demanded velvet curtains. Ethan told a story about a judge who fell asleep during closing arguments and had to be nudged awake by a clerk. We laughed, tentatively, but it was laughter. Then Rachel grew quiet. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a small wrapped parcel. "I didn't think I'd get to give this to you tonight," she said. "But I brought something." I took it from her hand, steady despite the emotion rising again. Inside was a hand-drawn card and a soft watercolor sketch, an image of 3 chairs on the beach side by side facing the ocean. One of the chairs had a small pendant draped over the back, the same one I was wearing. "It's not much," she said, "but I wanted you to know I still see you." I couldn't speak right away. I just reached across the space and touched her hand. Ethan set his plate down and leaned back. "I think we've been asleep," he said, letting someone else define who we are to each other. Rachel nodded. "It's not an excuse, but it's what happened." I let that settle. No one tried to rush past the discomfort. Mark refilled our glasses and raised his. "To seeing clearly," he said, "even if it takes too long." We toasted quietly. Later, as the evening deepened and the music shifted to something slower, I looked around the room. Rachel was curled up in the corner of the couch, feet tucked beneath her, sketching absent-mindedly in a small notebook. Ethan had fallen into quiet conversation with Mark, the two of them, discussing old jazz albums and courtroom drama series. And I sat with a plate of half-eaten lemon cake, the familiar tang of citrus reminding me that some traditions once broken can be remade. It wasn't the birthday I had imagined, but maybe it was the one I needed. Not a celebration orchestrated by someone who wanted control, but a gathering built on choice, on effort, on truth. There would be hard days ahead. I knew that. But there was also this, and it was more than enough to begin again. A year later, I turned 61. There was no formal invitation this time. No carefully arranged dinner orchestrated by anyone else. No expectations of grandeur or forced peace. I hosted the evening myself in my own home, the same little coastal house I had moved into after the divorce, the one with the creaky floors, the white curtains that billowed with the sea breeze, the porch swing that faced west toward the water. I cleaned for 2 days straight, even though I told myself not to fuss. I set the table with mismatched plates and cloth napkins I had sewn years ago. I baked the lemon cake, of course I did. It was second nature now, muscle memory, and I set 3 extra chairs outside on the porch just in case. I didn't know what to expect. But at 5:30 sharp, I heard a knock at the door. Rachel stood there holding a bouquet of sunflowers, her cheeks pink from the wind. Behind her, Ethan carried a bottle of wine and a small wrapped box, and they weren't alone. Between them was my grandson, Rachel's boy. Barely 4 years old, clinging shyly to his mother's leg holding a drawing that looked suspiciously like 3 stick figures and a very crooked lemon. I stepped aside silent for a moment, taking it in. No speeches, no apologies, just presence. "Happy birthday, Mom," Rachel said, her voice quiet but steady. Ethan kissed my cheek. We thought we'd celebrate properly this time. Later that evening, we sat out on the porch, the breeze soft, the horizon lit with streaks of orange and lavender. The lemon cake had been devoured, the wine nearly gone. My grandson had fallen asleep with his head on Rachel's lap, his small hand clutching a plastic truck. There was no talk of Julie, no mention of the past year's silence from her. We didn't need it. Some things are best left in the rearview mirror, not out of avoidance, but because they no longer steer the direction of your life. Rachel leaned her head on my shoulder. "This feels better," she said. "Simple, real." I nodded. "It is." We sat quietly for a while longer, and in that silence, I understood something I hadn't before. We cannot always control how we are remembered or where we are placed in someone else's story, but we can write our own. Sometimes healing doesn't look like a grand reunion. It looks like folding napkins, baking cake, setting chairs and trusting someone will choose to sit beside you, and sometimes they do. If you've ever found yourself standing on the outside of your own family, wondering how love became something you had to earn, the story was for you. Maybe your name was quietly removed from invitations. Maybe your voice was softened into silence over the years. Or maybe, like me, you brought something to the table, something real, something heartfelt, and were turned away anyway. But please hear this. You are not invisible. You are not difficult. And you are not alone. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to stop waiting to be welcomed and start building a space where you are already enough. Because the people who deserve a seat at your table are the ones who never make you question whether you belong. So if this story spoke to something inside you, share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to begin again, that healing is not just possible, it's yours to claim. And if you're comfortable, leave a comment below. Tell us about the moment you chose yourself, or about the time someone finally chose you, because someone out there is still waiting to believe they can do the same. Thank you for listening.